Invite your friends and family.
It's DJ Kelly in the morning on UMERADIO. Inspiration, news, trends, and lots of music. It's DJ Kelly in the morning.
Radio.
So we start with the news again. It's February 17, 2020. You are listening to UMERADIO, WMEDB New York. And this front page coverage is coming from the New York Times. All the news that's fit to print. I'm DJ Kelly. Today, clouds and some sunshine, high 48. Tonight, increasing clouds, low 35. Tomorrow, rain beginning in the late morning, mild, high 50. And the weather map can be seen on page B8. Okay, I try to describe the photo on the page every morning, and it's like I'm seeing what looks like a bus, and you have persons in the bus and everyone is wearing the face mask, and there's a man walking to the side of the bus. He too is wearing a face mask, and it says, oh, it's not a boat, it's not a bus, it's a ship. The subtext beneath it says, evacuation, U.S. citizens leaving the Diamond Princess on Monday in Japan, where it was quarantined for over a week. That story is on page A8. Other stories on the front page. If you're listening to us on Podbean, the podcast ends at 60 minutes or an hour. We don't have control over that. So what will happen is the podcast will end, the broadcast will end for you. You can continue listening on UMERadio. You can get the app on your Play Store or Apple Store, UMERadio, or you can go to our website, umeradio.com, and you can listen to the rest of the broadcast there. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And back to the news. Okay, so the first story here, tech industry pushes back on U.S. rules. Businesses dread sting from curbs on China. This story is by Anna Swanson and David Maccabee. The Trump administration's push to prevent China from dominating the market for advanced technologies has put it on a collision course with the same American companies it wants to protect. Firms that specialize in microchips, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and other industries have grown increasingly alarmed by the administration's efforts to restrict the flow of technology to China, saying it could drain expertise, research, and revenue from the United States, ultimately eroding America's advantage. The concerns, which have been simmering for months, have taken on new urgency as the Commerce Department considers adopting a sweeping proposal that would allow the United States to block transactions between American firms and Chinese counterparts. Those rules, on top of new restrictions on Chinese investment in the United States and proposed measures that would prevent American companies from exporting certain products and sharing technology with foreign nationals, have the tech industry scrambling to respond. The Trump administration's crackdown has already prompted foreign firms to shun American components and technology over concerns that access to parts they need could be abruptly cut off. American companies are watching warily as the United States considers restricting export licenses for companies that sell products or share intellectual property with China, including General Electric, which sells aircraft parts to China as part of a joint venture with Safran, a French firm. That story continues on page A5. In other story, it's Union versus Sanders over hard-won benefits. Medicare for all plan lands with a thud, and rivals pounce. This story is by Jennifer Medina and Jonathan Martin. Senator Bernie Sanders is a longtime supporter of Medicare for all. I wrote the damn bill, he said on a debate stage last summer, and his support for universal health care has helped propel him to the front of the 2020 Democratic field. But in Nevada, where the race heads next, his signature policy is liability with the largest labor union in the state, and the union has enthusiastic allies in Mr. Sanders' opponents. On Friday morning, moments after Senator Amy Klobuchar finished a tour on the healthcare facility run by the Culinary Workers Union, she began to lace into Mr. Sanders and his focus on the proposal, which would effectively eliminate union members' current health care system. It is unwise and unrealistic, she argued, to eliminate the private health insurance that millions of Americans now use, or to think such a measure could pass. Since we're in Vegas, I'd say if your number is not on the wheel, maybe you don't want to bet on that number, Ms. Klobuchar said. A night earlier, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, raised the issue at a forum for Latino voters. Who are we to tell them that they have to give up those plans? Mr. Buttigieg said of the Culinary Workers' health care coverage. Then there's Tom Steyer, the billionaire self-funder who is competing aggressively in Nevada and has started airing a commercial that says union don't like Mr. Sanders' plan and includes a vow to protect union negotiated plans. The flurry of attacks against Mr. Sanders in Nevada illustrates his growing strength and the urgency his Democratic rivals feel about the need to stop him from winning the most voters in a third consecutive contest next Saturday. If no Democrat slows Mr. Sanders in the caucuses here, he will gather what may be unstoppable momentum heading into next month's Super Tuesday states. But the offensive against the Vermont senator also highlighted some of his glaring vulnerabilities. The Culinary Union, which represents many of the workers in the Las Vegas's casinos, is opposed to his single-player plan, and after its leaders stated that opposition there were met with the sort of scathing and personal invective that critics of Mr. Sanders often receive. That story continues on page A13. Apparently, Culinary Workers Local 226, which is 60,000 members strong and over half Latino. Wow, okay. In other stories, Trial of Errors, Freed Suspect in Rape Case by Ashley Southall. One frigid morning in January 2019, a New York University student woke up in her apartment near the school's Manhattan campus to find a masked man standing over her in bed. He told her not to scream, she told investigators, and then he held her down and raped her. 2 months later, the police matched fingerprints found on an unopened condom wrapper in her room to those of a 22-year-old man named Tyler Lockett, who happened to be in jail on charges of having committed 3 burglaries in Brooklyn. What should have been a lucky break for law enforcement, however, soon turned disastrous. Instead of being charged with rape, Mr. Lockett was released from jail in July, and the authorities said he attacked 3 more women over 2 weeks before he was caught. Investigators in the New York Police Department's Special Victims Division made a series of errors leading to Mr. Lockett's release, including failing to inform prosecutors he was a rape suspect after his fingerprints were found, according to several law enforcement officials, the student's mother, and a police document. This story continues on page A15. Another story on the front page of the New York Times is Rush to Contain Virus as Throng Exits Cruise Ship. U.S. citizens is infected. 1,000 travelers dispersed in Cambodia. Fear of turning point. The story is by Richard C. Paddock, Sue Lee Wee, and Ronnie Karen Rabin. The cruise ship had been shunned at port after port for fear it might carry the coronavirus, but when the Westerdam arrived in Cambodia on Thursday, the Prime Minister greeted its passengers with flowers. Amid assurances that the ship was disease-free, hundreds of elated passengers disembarked. Some went sightseeing, visiting beaches and restaurants, and getting massages. Others traveled on to destinations around the world. One, however, did not make it much farther than the thermal scanners at the Kuala Lumpur airport in Malaysia. The passenger, an American, was stopped on Saturday and later tested positive for the coronavirus. On Sunday, with passengers already headed for destinations on at least 3 continents, health officials were scrambling to determine how big a problem they now have and how to stop it from getting bigger. We anticipated glitches, but I have to tell you that I didn't anticipate one of this magnitude, said Dr. Williams Schaffner, an infectious disease specialist at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. With more than 1,000 passengers from the Westerdam headed for home, Dr. Schaffner said it may be harder than ever to keep the coronavirus outbreak contained in China. This could be a turning point, he said. It is unclear how well the passengers were screened before they were allowed off the ship, but the best approach to containing a broader spread of the virus from the Westerdam would be to track down all of the passengers and quarantine them for 2 weeks, experts said. It won't be easy. Dr. Peter Rabinowitz, co-director of the Meta Center for Pandemic Preparedness and Global Health Security at University of Washington, said the episode would test the limits of contact tracing, the method used to find people exposed to infection. It's really daunting to control a situation like this now that people have gone all over the world, Dr. Rabinowitz said. More than 140 passengers from the ship flew to Malaysia, and all but the American woman who tested positive and her husband. That story continues on page A8. In other stories, China's factories immobilized by disease struggle to reopen. This story is by Keith Bradshaw. Airbus is slowly restarting its assembly line in China. General Motors began limited production on Saturday. Toyota followed on Monday morning. Fitfully and painfully, and with some worried prodding from Beijing, China is trying to reopen for business. The world's second largest economy practically shut down 3 weeks ago as a viral outbreak sickened tens of thousands of people, unexpectedly lengthening a Chinese holiday. The freeze set off warnings that the global economy could be in jeopardy if the world's preeminent manufacturing powerhouse stayed shut for long. Now, as some factories rumble back into action, the monumental task of restarting China is becoming clear. China's efforts to contain the virus are clashing with its push to get the country back to work, requiring the country's leaders to strike a balance between keeping people safe and getting vital industries back on track. This story continues on page A7. And in other news headlines, another story that's on the front page. Black families helped define Chicago. Why are they leaving? And there's a photo on the page as well. You see a street, a pedestrian walkway, and in the rearview mirror, the face of a black man. And the subtext beneath that says Hardis White is one of the over 200,000 African Americans who have moved away from Chicago. This story is by Julie Bosman. Hardis White, 78, could hardly wait to break out of suburbia. He dressed in a flannel shirt, jeans, and a bear's cap, strode out of the rectangular bungalow he shares with his wife and daughter, and folded his tall frame behind the wheel on his silver Nissan sedan. 40 minutes away from his suburban neighborhood of Hillside, he arrived in Chicago on LaPorte Avenue to see what he had come to see: a handsome brick house with white trim, 2 stories tall, as solid as the first day he saw it in 1967. For a moment he gazed at the house. Marvin Gaye played softly on the radio. The grass seemed a little long, he murmured. He put the car back in gear and started back to the suburbs. I don't know why I keep coming back, he said. I guess I just miss the neighborhood. Some people, lured by nostalgia and curiosity, drive past their old houses now and then. Mr. White does it nearly every day. Today, he is one of the more than 200,000 African Americans who have moved out of Chicago in the last 2 decades, though in some ways he never left. For more than a year, he has taken this daily pilgrimage back to the house on LaPorte, to the city where his children grew up and where 2 of his daughters still live. The steady exodus of African Americans has caused alarm and grief in Chicago, the nation's 3rd largest city, where Black people have shaped the history, culture, and political life. The population of 2.7 million is still nearly split in thirds among whites, Blacks, and Latinos, but the balance is shifting. Chicago saw its population decline in 2018, the 4th year in a row. Since 2015, almost 50,000 Black residents have left. This story continues on page A10, and those are the stories making the New York Times front page. Now here are our other headlines. In business, too much acute thing. Too much acute thing? That's a question. Japan's fading towns saw colorful mascots as a way to lure tourists, but many are now being quietly killed off. Page B1. No NPR tote bag on his arm. President Trump has questioned the existence of NPR, and the broadcaster is not taking this threat lightly. That is on page B1. In international headlines, Somalia's civilian forces, after 3 decades of chaos, the country's medics, road builders, and educators are often not government workers but young volunteers. Page A4. Catfishing as weapon of war. The Israeli military said Hamas tried to dupe its troops by posing as women seeking romance. Page A5. In New York, most visible Jews targeted. Jewish people, particularly Orthodox Jews, are on edge after an increase in hate crimes against them. That story on page A14. And in sports, a cheer filled the lap for Trump. The president took the track in his limousine before the Daytona 500, which was postponed by rain. Page D4. Astros scandal is lingering. Many fans and players don't think MLB's penalties went far enough. More ugliness is possible. Page D1. And finally, in national news, water rising in Mississippi after days of torrential rain. A 33,000-acre reservoir was swamped, pushing the Pearl River over its banks and forcing evacuations. Officials fear that the worst is still to come. That's on page 12. And final headline: a fresh start for veterans in Los Angeles. A nearly 400-acre campus with more than 1,600 housing units represents one of the country's most ambitious plans to address the homeless crisis among veterans. That story is on page 11, and that ends our coverage of the New York Times front page and all the stories therein. Now let's go over to migration trends, and what I always say is, if you travel, if your family travel, if you plan to travel, if you have anything to do with travel, then migration should matter to you. And here are 5 facts about illegal immigration in the US, and I'm talking about human migration. So we're reading from the Fact Tank by Pew Research, and you can check out their website for more information, pewresearch.org. So 5 facts about illegal immigration in the US, and this research report was published on June 12, 2019, and it was published by some names I can't really pronounce, but if you go to pewresearch.org, you'll see it. The number of unauthorized immigrants living in the United States has dropped to the level it was in 2004, and Mexicans are no longer a majority of this population. This decline is due mainly to a large drop in the number of new unauthorized immigrants, especially Mexicans, coming into the country. The origin countries of unauthorized immigrants also shifted during that time, with the number from Mexico declining and the number rising from Central America and Asia, according to the latest Pew Research Center estimates. Here are 5 facts about the unauthorized immigrant population in the US. Number 1, there are 10.5 million unauthorized immigrants in the United States in 2017. Representing 3.2% of the total U.S. population that year. The 2017 unauthorized immigrant total is a 14% drop from the peak of 12.2 million in 2007, when this group was 4% of the U.S. population. Number 2, the number of Mexican unauthorized immigrants declined in 2007, while the total from other nations ticked up. Mexicans made up less than half of all unauthorized U.S. immigrants, 47%, in 2017 for the first time, according to the center's estimate, compared with 57% in 2007. Their numbers and share of the total have been declining in recent years. There were 4.9 million Mexican unauthorized immigrants living in the U.S. in 2017, down from 6.9 million in 2007. Number 3, the U.S. civilian workforce includes 7.6 million unauthorized immigrants, representing a decline since 2007. Between 2007 and 2017, the number of unauthorized immigrant workers fell by 625,000, as did their share of the total U.S. workforce over the same period. In 2017, this group accounted for 4.6% of those in the U.S. who were working or were unemployed and looking for work. And number 4, 6 states account for 57% of unauthorized immigrants: California, Texas, Florida, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. From 2007 to 2017, individual states experienced different trends. The unauthorized immigrant population decreased in a dozen states: Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Michigan, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, and Oregon. In 5 states, the unauthorized immigrant population rose over the same period: Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And final fact, number 5, a rising share of unauthorized immigrants have lived in the U.S. for more than a decade. About 2/3, 66% of unauthorized immigrants, adults in 2017, had been in the U.S. more than 10 years, compared with 41% in 2007. A declining share of unauthorized immigrants have lived in the United States for 5 years or less, 20% of adults in 2017 compared with 30% in 2007. In 2017, unauthorized immigrant adults had lived in the U.S. for a median of 15.1 years, meaning that half had been in the country at least that long. Please note, this is an update to a post originally published on November 18, 2014, and that brings us to an end to our migration matters or facts or trends. And today we're sharing with you from Think with Google, that's our source. And the information we'll be sharing with you is a little bit different today. It's really like tips that we're sharing with you. So tips on creating ads people want to see. Your ads are content. Treat them accordingly. We are past the age of shouting, convincing, or simply tricking people into making a purchase. And if you've been following us every day and every morning that you listen to Consumer Trends, you will know that to be so. You have to inspire people to take an interest in your offer, product, or service. It is very important for brand builders to understand their potential customers in order to be strategic in your marketing and advertising. And so here we go. This information I'm about to share with you was written by is an extract from an article written by Brad Bender, VP of Display and Video Ads at Google. Ads play a major role in sustaining the free and open web. Ads underwrite the great content and services that users get for free. They support a universe of creators and publishers, and they enable marketers of all types and sizes to connect with people interested in what they have to offer. But expectations are changing. Increasingly, there are users who feel shortchanged in this deal, especially when it comes to their privacy and the ways their personal data is being handled. Last year, people made more than 2.5 billion visits to their Google account pages, where they can view or adjust how their ads are personalized. So 1, cultivate direct relationships with your users. That's number 1. Number 2, choose partners who can help you manage increased complexity. And number 3, manage customer data and discover insights in a privacy-safe way. It is our experience that people prefer ads that are relevant, but only if those ads meet users' expectations in 3 key areas. And here are the 3 key areas. 1, transparency. People should be able to easily see how their data is being used for ads, including what data is collected and who's collecting it. Number 2, choice. People's choices about how ads are tailored to them should be respected, and any attempts to bypass those choices should be prevented. And finally, number 3, control. People should have control over the data used to tailor their ads, including who has access to it, how long it's stored, and how it is used. That brings us to an end of our news coverage, and we look at news trends, migration trends, and consumer insights. So that is what we have for you for today. We want to thank you for being here with us.